At 4:30 in the morning on October 24, 1942, Lieutenant Colonel Louis Burwell Puller stood in a clearing on Guadalcanal watching 2,500 Japanese soldiers close a three-sided trap around his 800 Marines. He was 44 years old, had been in the Corps for 24 years, had 13 combat deployments, and this was the first time he'd ever ordered his men to stop retreating and let the enemy surround them. Intelligence reports had tracked the Japanese 124th Infantry Regiment for 6 days. They'd crossed the Guadalcanal River in 3 separate columns. They'd positioned machine gun nests on the ridgelines. They'd cut off every escape route except one narrow trail heading south. The pattern was exactly what Japanese rules said to do. Surround, separate, destroy. It had worked at Singapore. It had worked in the Philippines. It had worked in every major fight since December 1941. British pilot spots German fighter. British pilot pushes into a dive. Engine cuts out. The Japanese had a similar advantage. They trained for night combat. American forces didn't. They moved through jungle terrain at speeds that seemed impossible. They coordinated complex flanking movements without radio communication. And they had an unshakable belief in the superiority of offensive action. Bushido code demanded attack. American defensive positions meant nothing if Japanese infantry could get behind them. The Guadalcanal River operation had started October 20th. The 1st Marine Division needed to push Japanese forces west away from Henderson Field. Henderson Field was the only working airstrip on Guadalcanal. Lose the airstrip and the entire island fell. Lose the island and the Japanese controlled the sea lanes to Australia. The strategic stakes were absolute. Major General Alexander Vandegrift had assigned the mission to the 7th Marine Regiment. 3 battalions, 2,400 men. Their goal was to cross the Guadalcanal, set up a defensive area, and hold it long enough for engineers to build a bridge. Simple mission, except Japanese commanders had predicted exactly this move. Lieutenant General Masao Maruyama commanded Japanese forces on Guadalcanal. He had 17,000 soldiers under his command. The 124th Infantry Regiment was his most experienced unit. They'd fought in China for 3 years. They'd conquered British positions in Malaya. They specialized in jungle warfare and night attacks. Maruyama had given them specific orders. Let the Marines cross the river. Let them move inland. Then cut them off and destroy them piece by piece. The trap worked perfectly. On October 22nd, Marine reconnaissance patrols reported Japanese movement on both flanks. By October 23rd, the 7th Marines were in a horseshoe formation with Japanese forces pressing from 3 directions. The only escape route was south through a narrow valley. Battalion commanders requested permission to withdraw. Vandegrift approved, but Puller had a different idea. Puller commanded 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. His 5 companies held the western edge of the Marine perimeter. Intelligence estimates put Japanese strength at 2,500 to 3,000 soldiers in his sector. Puller had 860 men. Standard rules said withdraw when outnumbered 3-1. Find better ground. Regroup. Call in artillery support. Fight from prepared positions. Puller told his company commanders to stop moving. They'd hold exactly where they were. Not withdraw 1 more yard. The clearing they occupied had a name. The locals called it Coffin Corner. Ridge lines on 3 sides. Dense jungle behind them. Open ground in front. Terrible defensive position by every normal measure. Battalion staff officers told Puller they'd be slaughtered. Puller told them to prepare fields of fire and wait for nightfall. If you want to see how Puller turned certain encirclement into the most devastating ambush in Marine Corps history, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Pacific War. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Puller. He'd learned jungle warfare the hard way. Nicaragua, 1928 through 1933. 5 years hunting Augusto Sandino's guerrillas through mountainous terrain. Puller had commanded Guardia Nacional patrols, small units operating independently. No supply lines, no artillery support, just rifles, ammunition, and tactical cleverness. He'd been ambushed 4 times. He'd survived because he understood something basic about human psychology in combat. Attackers commit to their assault plan. Once they start moving, they can't easily change direction. If you know where they're coming from, you don't need to withdraw. You need to build a killing field and wait. Puller had earned 5 Navy crosses in Nicaragua. That was more than any Marine in history at that time. He'd received the first one in 1930 for defending a position against a force 3 times his size. The citation mentioned his coolness under fire and tactical brilliance in defensive operations. But what Puller really understood was geometry. Control the angles of approach. Force the enemy to attack across open ground. Concentrate fire at choke points. Let them come to you. By 1942, Puller had spent 24 years studying how soldiers moved under combat stress. He'd commanded garrison troops in China. He'd trained infantry battalions at Quantico. He'd read every after-action report from every jungle campaign the Marine Corps had fought. And he'd noticed something about Japanese tactics. They were predictable. They always attacked at night. They always tried to get behind defensive positions. And they always assumed American forces would panic and break under coordinated assault. Puller ordered his company commanders to report to his position at 2 in the afternoon. 5 captains gathered in the clearing. Captain Robert Haggerty commanded Able Company on the left flank. Captain Marshall Moore commanded Baker Company holding the center. Captain Chester Cockrell commanded Charlie Company on the right. Captain Stephen Sabole commanded Weapons Company with the machine guns and mortars. Captain James Shanley commanded the battalion reserve. Puller spread a hand-drawn map on the ground. He'd sketched the terrain from memory and patrol reports. The clearing was roughly rectangular, 300 yards wide, 400 yards deep. Jungle on all sides except the northern approach, where the ground opened into a slight valley. Ridge lines rose 50 feet on the east and west sides. Dense secondary growth covered everything beyond 20 yards from the clearing edge. Puller pointed to 3 likely approach routes. The Japanese would attack from the north across open ground, from the northeast through the valley, and from the northwest along a trail his scouts had found that morning. They wouldn't attack from the south because that's where the Marines were supposedly retreating. They wouldn't attack from the east or west ridge lines because the terrain was too steep for coordinated movement. That left 3 directions of attack. All of them would funnel Japanese infantry into predetermined kill zones. The captains understood immediately. This wasn't a defensive position. It was a trap. Puller wanted the Japanese to think they'd surrounded a demoralized, retreating American unit. He wanted them to attack confidently. He wanted them to commit their entire force to a frontal assault across ground where Marines had pre-sighted every machine gun, every mortar, every rifle position. Haggerty asked about artillery support. Puller told him there wouldn't be any. The nearest artillery battery was 4 miles southeast. Shells would take 3 minutes to arrive after the fire mission was called. 3 minutes was long enough for the Japanese to close to hand-to-hand range. Once they were that close, artillery became useless. You couldn't shell positions that close to your own lines without killing your own men. Moore asked about naval gunfire. The destroyer USS Buchanan was offshore providing fire support for the 7th Marines. Puller said the same problem applied. The clearing was too small. Naval guns couldn't hit targets that close to friendly forces without massive friendly casualties. The Marines would fight with what they carried: rifles, machine guns, mortars, grenades, bayonets. Cockrell asked about ammunition. This was the critical question. If they were going to hold position and fight at close range, they'd burn through ammunition faster than normal defensive operations. Puller had already thought about this. He'd ordered every available pack mule and carrying party to haul ammunition forward. Each rifleman would carry 300 rounds instead of the standard 100. Each machine gun crew would have 4,000 rounds instead of 1,500. Mortar crews would have twice their normal load of high explosive shells. Sabole asked about fields of fire. Puller wanted undergrowth cleared to a distance of 50 yards in front of every position, not completely cleared. That would alert Japanese scouts that Marines were preparing for a fight, just enough to create lanes where machine gun fire could sweep without obstruction. The clearing work had to be done quietly. No chainsaws, no explosives, just machetes and manual labor. And it had to be finished before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when Japanese scouts would likely start their final reconnaissance before nightfall. Shanley asked about the reserve. Puller wanted 1 full company held back in the jungle 200 yards south of the main line. If Japanese forces broke through anywhere, the reserve would counterattack immediately. No waiting for orders, no request for permission. See a breakthrough, plug it with riflemen and grenades. Simple concept, brutally difficult execution. The captains returned to their companies. Word spread through the battalion. No retreat. Prepare positions. Wait for nightfall. Marines started clearing undergrowth. They cut firing lanes with machetes. They repositioned machine guns to cover overlapping sectors. They stacked grenades within arm's reach of every foxhole. They test-fired mortars to confirm range calculations. They ate cold rations because smoke from cooking fires would reveal their positions. And they waited. Puller walked the perimeter personally. He checked every machine gun position. He looked at sight lines. He asked gun crews if they could see their primary and secondary sectors. He made small adjustments. Move this gun 3 yards left. Clear that bush blocking your field of fire. Dig this position 6 inches deeper. Details mattered. In combat, small advantages added up to survival. At 4:01 in the afternoon, Puller gathered his platoon leaders, 23 second lieutenants and first lieutenants. Young men mostly, average age 24. Half of them had been commissioned less than a year earlier. They'd trained at Quantico in classrooms and on firing ranges, but classroom training didn't prepare anyone for what was coming. Puller needed them calm and confident. He told them the Japanese would attack after dark, probably between 10 at night and 2 Washo in the morning. That was their preferred window for night attacks. They'd come in waves. First wave would be probing attacks, small units testing the perimeter for weak points. Second wave would be the main assault, hundreds of soldiers attacking simultaneously across multiple axes. Third wave would be the reserve exploitation, fresh troops pushing through any breach the second wave created. Puller told his lieutenants to hold fire during the first wave. Let the Japanese probes get close enough to see individual soldiers, then kill them with concentrated rifle fire. Don't waste machine gun ammunition on small targets. Save the machine guns for the main assault. When hundreds of Japanese soldiers came across the clearing, that's when the machine guns opened up. Maximum rate of fire, sustained fire, sweep left to right, overlap sectors with adjacent guns. Create a wall of bullets that nothing could cross. The lieutenants asked questions. What if the Japanese got into the foxholes? Fix bayonets and fight hand-to-hand. What if they came from an unexpected direction? Trust the men on that sector to handle it and stay focused on your own sector. What if communication broke down? Every platoon leader had specific sectors. Defend your sector. Don't worry about anyone else's sector. The plan was simple enough that it would work even if everything went wrong. Puller dismissed the lieutenants. Darkness came at 6:00 in the evening. Full dark by 6:30, no moon. Cloud cover blocked starlight. Perfect conditions for Japanese night attack. Puller settled into a foxhole near the center of the Marine perimeter. He could see maybe 30 yards in the darkness. That was optimistic. Realistically, visual range was closer to 15 yards. Fighting would happen at point-blank range. At 9 Waschi at night, a Marine listening post 300 yards north reported movement. Multiple contacts moving south toward the clearing. Japanese scouts, almost certainly. They'd be checking Marine positions before the main force attacked. Puller passed word down the line. Hold fire. Let them get close. Don't reveal your positions. At 9:45, Japanese soldiers appeared at the clearing edge. Puller counted maybe 15 soldiers. They moved cautiously. They were trying to determine Marine strength and disposition. One soldier stepped into the clearing. He walked maybe 20 yards, then stopped. He was listening, trying to hear American voices or equipment noise. The Marines stayed silent, absolutely silent. The Japanese soldier waited 3 minutes. Then he withdrew back into the jungle. At 10:15, the first wave hit. 40 Japanese soldiers rushed across the clearing from the north. They came screaming, "Banzai charge!" Standard Japanese shock tactics supposed to terrify defenders into breaking position. The Marines waited until the Japanese were 30 yards away. Then every rifleman on the northern perimeter opened fire simultaneously. Controlled fire. Aimed shots. The Japanese advance collapsed. Bodies fell in heaps. Survivors tried to retreat. Marine machine guns caught them in crossfire. The entire first wave was dead within 90 seconds. Silence returned. Puller waited. The main assault would come soon. The first wave had been reconnaissance by force. Now Japanese commanders knew exactly where the Marines were positioned. They knew the Marines weren't retreating. They knew they had to commit overwhelming force to break the perimeter. At 11 Shun, Mortars started falling on Marine positions. Japanese Type 97 mortars, 81mm shells. High explosive. The barrage lasted 12 minutes. Shells impacted randomly across the clearing. Marines pressed themselves into foxholes. Shrapnel whined overhead. 3 Marines were killed, 7 wounded. But the mortar barrage wasn't accurate enough to suppress the Marine defensive positions. Puller had positioned his foxholes with overhead cover. Simple construction, logs and dirt packed 18 inches thick, enough to stop shrapnel from anything but a direct hit. The barrage stopped at 11:12. Then the main assault began. Puller saw them come out of the jungle. Hundreds of soldiers moving in loose formation spread across the entire northern and northeastern approach. They weren't screaming this time. They were moving tactically, using fire and maneuver. Some soldiers fired rifles while others advanced. Then they switched. Coordinated movement. Professional infantry executing doctrine. Marine machine gunners waited until the Japanese were 50 yards away. Then they opened fire. 6 Browning M1917 water-cooled machine guns. Each gun fired 500 rounds per minute, 3,000 rounds per minute combined. The sound was continuous, a sustained roar that drowned out everything else. Japanese soldiers fell in waves. They kept coming. More soldiers emerged from the jungle. They stepped over their own dead and kept advancing. At 40 yards, Marine riflemen joined the fire. 860 rifles, not all firing simultaneously. The Marines used controlled fire. Aim, shoot, work the bolt, aim again, shoot again. Every round had to count. Ammunition was finite. The battle would last hours. Wasting ammunition in the first 30 minutes meant hand-to-hand fighting later when supplies ran out. The Japanese assault reached 30 yards. Marines could see individual faces. Young men, determined expressions. They carried Arisaka Type 38 rifles with bayonets fixed. Some carried grenades. Officers carried katana swords. They were committed to reaching Marine lines. Doctrine demanded it. Bushido required it. They couldn't retreat without dishonor. Machine guns cut them down at 25 yards. Bodies piled on top of bodies. The Japanese advance stalled. Officers screamed orders. Soldiers tried to regroup. Marine mortars started falling among the Japanese formations. 60mm mortars. High explosive rounds that detonated 6 feet above the ground. Shrapnel spread horizontally, devastating against infantry in the open. Each mortar round killed or wounded multiple soldiers. The mortar crews worked frantically. Load, drop, fire, repeat. They sustained a rate of 15 rounds per minute. The Japanese assault broke at 1 in the morning. Survivors retreated into the jungle. The clearing was covered with bodies. Puller couldn't count them in the darkness. Hundreds, certainly. Maybe more. Marines called out casualty reports. 14 dead, 31 wounded. Ammunition status reports came in. Machine guns had used approximately 40% of available ammunition. Riflemen had used maybe 30%. Mortars had fired half their high explosive shells, enough to handle another assault, maybe 2 more assaults if they were careful. Puller knew the Japanese would attack again. They'd committed too much force to withdraw now. Japanese doctrine didn't allow for retreat after a failed assault. You attacked again with reserves. You attacked until you broke through or until everyone was dead. There was no middle ground. At 1:30, Japanese mortar fire resumed. This barrage was more accurate. Shells landed directly on Marine foxholes. 4 more Marines killed, 9 wounded. Puller moved among the positions. He checked on wounded Marines. He redistributed ammunition from casualties to active fighters. He spoke quietly to men who looked shaken. Calm words, steady presence. Leadership wasn't about grand speeches. It was about being visible when things were worst. At 2:00 in the morning, the second major assault began. This time, the Japanese attacked from 2 directions simultaneously. The northern approach again, but also from the northwest along the trail Puller's scouts had identified. Coordinated assault designed to split Marine defensive fire and create a breakthrough on one axis. The tactic was sound. If Marines concentrated fire on the northern attack, the northwestern attack might penetrate. If they split their fire evenly, neither sector would have enough concentrated firepower to stop the assault. Puller had anticipated this. He'd positioned his strongest company, Baker Company, directly facing the northern approach. He'd positioned Able Company facing northwest with interlocking fields of fire that covered both approaches. When the Japanese attacked on both axes, Marines didn't split their fire. Each company focused on its primary sector. Machine guns fired continuous bursts. Riflemen maintained steady aim fire. The two Japanese assault formations never coordinated their final rush. Baker Company stopped the northern attack at 40 yards. Able Company stopped the northwestern attack at 35 yards. Hand-to-hand fighting erupted on Able Company's left flank. A group of approximately 50 Japanese soldiers had penetrated through a gap between two machine gun positions. They reached the Marine foxholes. Bayonet fighting, knife fighting, rifle butts used as clubs. Close quarters combat in absolute darkness. Marines fought individually, no formations. No coordinated tactics, just individual Marines against individual Japanese soldiers in a desperate scramble for survival. Puller moved toward the breakthrough with his reserve platoon. 30 Marines. They counterattacked into the melee. Grenades, rifle fire at point-blank range, bayonets. The fighting lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, all 50 Japanese soldiers were dead. Able Company had lost 9 Marines killed and 14 wounded. The second assault collapsed at 2:40. Again, Japanese forces retreated into the jungle. Again, the clearing filled with bodies. Puller walked the perimeter, assessing damage. Ammunition was becoming critical. Machine guns had used 70% of available rounds. Riflemen had used 60%. Mortars were down to their last dozen shells. If the Japanese attacked again with equal force, the Marines might not have enough ammunition to stop them. At 3 in the morning, Marine listening posts reported more movement to the north. Large formations. The Japanese were preparing a third assault. Puller gathered his company commanders. He told them the next assault would likely be the last. The Japanese had committed approximately 2/3 of their available force. They had maybe 800 to 1,000 soldiers remaining. They'd throw everything at the Marine perimeter in one final overwhelming push. Puller issued new orders. Conserve ammunition until the enemy was within 25 yards. No suppressive fire, no covering fire. Every round had to kill a soldier. Machine gunners would fire 3 to 5 round bursts instead of sustained fire. Riflemen would aim carefully. 1 shot, 1 kill. Mortars would fire only at concentrated targets. No random harassment. Save every shell for the final assault. At 3:45, the third assault began. This time, the Japanese didn't use mortars first. They didn't probe for weak points. They didn't try coordinated flanking movements. They just attacked straight across the northern approach with every remaining soldier. One massive wave, maybe 900 men, shoulder to shoulder, moving fast. They were trying to overwhelm the Marine perimeter through sheer numbers before the Marines could kill enough of them to stop the momentum. It almost worked. The Japanese reached 20 yards before Marine machine guns opened fire. At that range, every burst hit multiple targets. Bodies fell in heaps, but there were too many soldiers. They kept coming. They reached the foxholes on Baker Company's front. Hand-to-hand fighting exploded across a 50-yard section of perimeter. Japanese soldiers jumped into foxholes with Marines. Bayonet fighting, rifle butt swinging. Marines fought with knives, entrenching tools, anything they could grab. Captain Moore was killed defending his command post, shot 3 times at close range while fighting off 4 Japanese soldiers with his pistol. Lieutenant James Sweat took command of Baker Company. He organized a counterattack using the reserve platoon. 27 Marines rushed forward. They cleared the penetration with grenades and rifle fire. Brutal close quarters fighting that lasted 8 minutes. On the left flank, Able Company faced a similar penetration. Japanese soldiers had broken through between 2 platoons. Captain Haggerty led a counterattack personally. He was shot in the shoulder. He kept fighting. He rallied his Marines and pushed the Japanese back to the clearing edge. Haggerty was shot again in the leg. He refused evacuation. He stayed in position, commanding his company until the assault collapsed. The third assault broke at 4:30. Not because the Japanese retreated. There were simply no more Japanese soldiers capable of attacking. The assault wave had been destroyed. Survivors melted into the jungle. Individual soldiers, small groups, disorganized, demoralized. Their regimental unity had shattered. Dawn came at 6 a.m. in the morning. First light revealed the magnitude of what had happened. The clearing was covered with Japanese bodies. Puller sent patrols forward to count the dead. They stopped counting at 600. There were more bodies in the jungle approaches, more scattered along the trails. Final estimates put Japanese casualties at approximately 2,300 killed. Another 200 wounded who later died. Nearly the entire 124th Infantry Regiment had been destroyed. Marine casualties were severe but manageable. 61 killed, 174 wounded. 42 of those wounded returned to duty within a week. The battalion remained combat effective. More importantly, the Marine perimeter had held. The Japanese encirclement had failed. The tactical initiative on Guadalcanal shifted permanently. Japanese commanders couldn't understand what had happened. Their intelligence had been correct. The Marines were outnumbered 3-1. The terrain favored the attackers. The encirclement was complete. By every measure, the Japanese should have won. But they'd attacked into a killing field that had been deliberately prepared. They'd committed their forces exactly where Puller wanted them, and they'd suffered casualties at a rate that made further offensive operations impossible. General Maruyama withdrew his forces westward. He lost nearly 3,000 soldiers in the Madanikaw operations. His effective combat strength dropped from 17,000 to 14,000. More critically, he'd lost his most experienced regiment. The 124th Infantry had been veteran soldiers. Replacements were green recruits who lacked jungle combat experience. Japanese offensive capability on Guadalcanal never recovered. The battle demonstrated something fundamental about defensive tactics. You didn't win by retreating to better ground. You won by choosing ground that gave you advantages, preparing it obsessively, and forcing the enemy to attack where you were strongest. Puller had understood this from his Nicaragua experience. Every successful defense he'd ever commanded had followed the same pattern. Control the geometry, channel the attack, create interlocking fields of fire. Let the enemy come to you. The engagement influenced Marine Corps doctrine for decades. Small unit defensive tactics changed. The concept of reverse slope defense became standard training. Don't defend on the hilltop where you're exposed. Defend on the reverse slope where the enemy has to crest the hill before seeing your positions. Don't defend in the open. Defend where terrain channels attackers into predictable kill zones. The principles Puller demonstrated at Guadalcanal appeared in Marine Corps training manuals published in 1944 and remained doctrine through the Korean War and Vietnam. Puller received his 4th Navy Cross for the Madanikaw action. The citation mentioned his tactical brilliance and extraordinary heroism. But what Puller had really demonstrated was patience. He'd waited for the perfect moment. He'd resisted the urge to withdraw when surrounded. He'd trusted his Marines to execute a complex defensive plan under extreme stress. And he'd turned a potential encirclement into the most lopsided victory of the Guadalcanal campaign. The battle established Puller's reputation as the finest small unit combat commander in the Marine Corps. He went on to command at Peleliu and in Korea. He earned a 5th Navy Cross at Chosun Reservoir in 1950, making him the most decorated Marine in history. But many of his subordinates believed the Madanikaw fight was his finest tactical achievement. He'd been outnumbered 3-1. He'd been surrounded on 3 sides, he'd had no artillery support and limited ammunition, and he'd killed 3 times as many enemy soldiers as his entire force numbered, while sustaining less than 20% casualties himself. Puller retired from the Marine Corps in 1955 after 37 years of service. He died June 11, 1971, age 73. The Marine Corps named buildings after him at Quantico and Camp Lejeune. The destroyer, USS Lewis B. Puller, was commissioned in his honor. Marine recruits still study the Madanikaw fight at basic training. It's taught as an example of perfect defensive tactics against superior numbers. Captain Haggerty survived his wounds and received the Navy Cross. He continued fighting on Guadalcanal until January 1943 when he was evacuated with malaria. He returned to combat at Tarawa and Saipan. He retired as a colonel in 1959. Captain Moore was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. Lieutenant Sweat received the Silver Star for assuming command and organizing the counterattack that saved Baker Company. The Japanese 124th Infantry Regiment ceased to exist as a combat-effective unit after the Madanikaw fight. It was officially disbanded in January 1943. Surviving soldiers were distributed as replacements to other regiments. The regimental colors were returned to Japan and placed in the Yasukuni Shrine. In 2003, the Naval History and Heritage Command published a detailed tactical study of the engagement. They used Japanese documents captured after the war and American after-action reports. The study concluded that Puller's decision to hold position rather than withdraw was unconventional, but tactically sound given the terrain and enemy doctrine. The study became required reading at the Marine Corps Command and Staff College. The principles remain relevant. Modern military doctrine still emphasizes the importance of choosing defensive ground carefully. The concept of defense in depth with interlocking fields of fire and prepared kill zones traces directly to tactics demonstrated at Guadalcanal. Every military academy in the world teaches some version of the lesson Puller proved on October 24, 1942. Sometimes the best defense isn't retreat. Sometimes it's standing exactly where you are and making the enemy come to you. So what surprised you most about this tactical masterpiece? Did you know that allowing an encirclement could actually be a winning strategy? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Marine Corps tactical history, give this video a like. It helps more history enthusiasts discover these incredible stories of courage and tactical genius. Every single like tells YouTube to share this with people who appreciate real military history. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story from the Pacific War. There are so many more battles like this waiting to be told. Stories about Marines who turned impossible odds into devastating victories through brilliant tactical thinking. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in California, Tokyo, Sydney? Our community stretches across the entire world. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served in the Pacific. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure stories like Chesty Puller's perfect kill zone are never forgotten.